Hello, welcome to another Purple Insider Extra. Matthew Coller along with Sam Ekstrom here. And as we approach the NFL draft, we've got lots of content for you and lots of things to discuss, especially because the Minnesota Vikings have a new general manager who will be making the picks. And Sam, over the last few years, it became pretty predictable how the Vikings were going to handle their drafts. I won't ruin our topic here, but it was this sort of same positions in the same areas of the draft and the same decisions of what to do with draft capital. So, question for you: Kwesi Adofo-Mensah going into his first year drafting as the Vikings general manager, what can he do different than what Rick Spielman did in the past?
Yeah, I think Rick Spielman had the view that you want evenly distributed talent all over the roster. And I think that in concept, that makes some sense. But rarely did he overload talent in one spot and just have a plethora of weapons. And I think that Kwesi could certainly consider, what positions do you never have a surplus at? Where can you just always have talent and it's always going to be good? I think at wide receiver, you could load up. Certainly on the defensive line, you could load up. I mean, you're always using rotations on the defensive line anyway. There's a lot of injuries on the defensive line. I don't think that's an area the Vikings really invested a ton in recent years from a draft capital standpoint. A lot of their investments were on the third day. So I think there's room to grow there. And maybe not trading down so much. I think that Rick Spielman was very, very adamant about increasing the number of shots he took. And oftentimes it came at the expense of missing on some great players. Like if you trade down 4 times to get to Alexander Madison at the end of the third round and you turn picks that you could have had in the third round into picks in the 7th round, well, you might be missing out on a pretty good third round player, which the Vikings did do that year. So I think there are several ways that Kwesi could pivot. And we'll see if he's a trade. We'll see if he's a trader like he was in his old career.
Yes, you mean TRADER in that way.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, and that's, so that's the thing too, is that it felt like what the Vikings were getting back for those trades down. And they also did it to take Jalen Holmes in 2018, where they traded out of the 3rd and back into the early 4th. With every draft pick that you go down, the likelihood of a great player goes down with it. And loading up on 6th and 7th is loading up on plays that have 1% chance to hit. How many players in those rounds have we seen in all the years we've covered the Vikings actually hit? It's really just, 2 or 3 basically. And if you're looking for that, and it's never been superstars out past the 5th with Stephon Diggs, it's always been, hey, maybe Stephen Weatherly could be a role player. And that was the other thing I wanted to bring up is chasing outliers, which means Danielle Hunter is not going to be repeated, and probably neither is Stephon Diggs. Though we like what KJ Osborne has done. We're impressed, but he's not becoming the next Stephon Diggs when you're taking a receiver in the 5th or 6th round. And it seemed like they consistently talked about over and over, this guy reminds me of Danielle Hunter. This guy reminds me of Danielle Hunter. Well, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has no priors that he's leaning on, prior successes. He can look at this with totally fresh eyes and say, just because a guy is lanky and didn't have production in college does not mean he's the next Danielle Hunter. And I think they've made that mistake a number of times.
Yeah, I mean, they saw Danielle's crazy measurables and thought, well, if we just find guys that physically look like him, it doesn't work that way. I mean, you need guys that have the drive, the crazy, processing ability of Danielle Hunter, just the brute, uncanny strength. You can't just, mold Danielle Hunters out of your lab. Like it doesn't happen that way. So I totally agree with that. I think that they got a little formulaic in the Spielman era. They would try to find interior line help like on the 3rd day, and then they pivoted. Oh well, we're only going to do 1st or 2nd round, and their cornerbacks were always early, but they neglected other positions. Like there was just sort of like these staples: the tight end in the 5th, the defensive tackle in the 4th, that they would always lean on. I think they got to shake it up a little bit more and just take good players that are available where you're picking. It's a simple philosophy, but I'd like to see it applied.
And I would add in that taking players for positions you didn't actually really need, but you felt like were needs. And this is very specific, but you brought up Alexander Madison. They were looking to replace Latavius Murray. Was that really necessary? Like, could that have been done with undrafted free agents or later round picks? How about even the long snapper position where Kevin McDermott had the hand issue? So he was injured and they went and shot for an Austin Cutting. Now, look, I mean, it's not that the 7th round pick, it cost the franchise or anything, but you drafted a long snapper that lasted 1 year. I mean, these were just things. And we saw even from last year when they drafted Daniel Carlson and then they cut him shortly after. But Greg Joseph comes in as a random free agent and kicks really well for them last year. These are positions that could be easily replaced. I'll even go back to Ben Gideon, who I think we both agree was a decent player, but a number 3 run stuffing linebacker. They just felt, oh, well, we need that very specific job, so let's draft it. And I think that was kind of erred thinking. Now, this does connect to, do you think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah looks at the number 12 pick as either A, an opportunity to go up and get a star player that they really need, or B, to drop back in this draft because some of their positions of need look like they're going to be bountiful with talent?
Yeah, that's interesting because if he's in cahoots with Kevin O'Connell and O'Connell comes from the Rams, then the Rams philosophy would be go get the player. I think the view from Los Angeles was draft capital is all theoretical currency, right? Like if we can use this currency to go get someone we know is going to be good. Now they would usually get existing players that have been in the league, veterans. But if you take that tact and you say, this is a literally can't miss prospect. If we spend next year's first and this year's first and we go get them, we are instantly going to be a better football team. If you can have that confidence, then I could see them making a move like that if he really wanted to make a splash in year 1. Although, Coller, if this is indeed a competitive rebuild, and we haven't seen a lot of rebuilding really going on, but does he want to give up a future asset like that in the first round? I mean, that's where you question it because this team is going to have to pay the piper financially. They are going to need to bring in a lot of young talent. Do you want to give up the potential of a first round pick in 2023, especially if you need a quarterback?
Right. I mean, trading down seems in their position to make a lot of sense if they're not pleased with what they see at the number 12 pick, but it is intriguing, as you mentioned, that if there's one player that they feel like could be the difference maker, it seems that teams are being much looser with their draft capital than they used to be, and they're just trading all over the place. And so we don't know what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is going to do now running the Minnesota Vikings. Also, I mean, I suppose it's still possible that players could pop up in the trade market and they could surprise us with a trade for a player or a player being traded on draft night, which was always rumored. Kyle Rudolph or Anthony Harris, always rumored, but never happened with trades for Minnesota Vikings players. I suppose that we could see that as well. So we'll be building up to the NFL draft, covering everything Vikings here on this YouTube channel, but also in longer form on our Purple Insider podcast and at purpleinsider.com with our written work. So make sure you check those out, hit the subscribe button here as well, and we will talk to you next time.